How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Thorn's Jungle. Take a step in. There are giant lizards in this jungle, which is exactly what we're talking about today. But before I get into it, of course, if you want more weekly episodes of Thorn's Jungle, head over to my Patreon. The link will be in the description, or just search Thorn's Jungle in Patreon, and you will get an extra episode each week for only $3 a month, which is crazy value. And also, you can do it so, like, if you have the Patreon app, you can listen to the podcast like through Spotify, but only Patreon members can do that. And also, if you want some Thorn's Jungle merch, head over to biothorn.com.au and check out the store. Right, that's enough of that. How's everyone's week been? It's been pissing down with rain here, but I've been loving every minute of it. But the sun will be out for the weekend, unfortunately, and still cold, which I cannot stand. But I hope everyone else out there has had a great week. I went out on a sailboat over the weekend and spent the night at Rottnest Island on the boat, but docked sort of just out from Rottnest Island. It was really cool. Really cool. Anyway, that's enough of catching up. Let's get into this episode about Komodo dragons. Now, I'm not going to just talk about your typical, the Komodo dragon is this, it weighs that, it's this. No, I'm going to talk about the history behind Komodo dragons. So, how it was discovered, when it was discovered, and things like that, because it's actually pretty damn cool. I like to talk about cryptozoology a lot on this show. I'm not a huge cryptozoology person because there is a lot of cryptozoological animals that I don't actually think exist, but there are a few that I do. So in a sense, I do love cryptozoology, but I'm pretty skeptical about most of them. But the ones that I do think exist, I find super fascinating. And the Komodo dragon, a lot of cryptozoology people, I don't want to say cryptozoologists, because they fancy themselves as a branch off of a zoologist, but I don't know any true zoologist that calls themselves a cryptozoologist. And also, when zoologists or biologists or anybody in similar fields discover a new species, they don't call themselves cryptozoologists. They just don't. So a lot of people that are into cryptozoology, they use the Komodo dragon kind of as an example for it was once thought to be this cryptozoological animal until it was proved to be real. So they use that as, it's only a matter of time until Bigfoot's been proved real, because the Komodo dragon was thought to just be a legend for so long. Whereas it wasn't quite like that. It was the same as the animal, the okapi, which is found in the Congo. It's a relative of the giraffe, a close relative of the giraffe, but it was only discovered within the last 100 years, or even sooner. And that's kind of like the mascot for cryptozoology. It was once thought to be a legend, but cryptozoologists went out there and found it, when no, they didn't. No cryptozoologist found the okapi, and as far as I'm aware, no cryptozoologist has ever discovered a new species of animal, because scientists that discover new species of animals don't call themselves cryptozoologists. So just to get that out of the way. But the cool thing about the Komodo dragon is that it was only discovered in 1910. Now, for those of you that have been living in a hole or a cave your entire life and don't know what the Komodo dragon is, it is the largest extant species of lizard alive today. Extant is the opposite of extinct, so it's the largest still living lizard on our planet. How large does it get, you ask? And I know you did ask that. Well, the largest verified specimen was a captive one, and it was over 10 feet long. So over 3 meters. and it weighed 160 kilograms, which is 366 pounds. But that was with a full stomach. And as we know, Komodo dragons can fill that stomach a hell of a lot. So I'm trying not to swear as much, but fuck, it fills it a shitload. Jeez. I'm Australian, I can't not swear. Like, it can basically swallow whole deer, which would add to that weight. So the largest wild specimen was still over 10 feet long, so over that 3 meter mark, and it weighed like 86 kilos, I think. But scientists think that on an empty stomach, Komodo dragons can get to that 100 kilo mark, so like 220 pound mark. So that's a big lizard. That is an enormous lizard, and they're heavily built, you know. There are crocodile monitors, which I believe are native to like Papua New Guinea, which can get longer, maybe longer, but they're really slightly built compared to the Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon is just a tank, all right? And in 1910, a soldier, just going to look at his name here, from the Dutch East Indies, which used to be what Indonesia was called, and it remained under colonial rule. So when this soldier, what's his name? God, it's going to be a weird Dutch name. Lieutenant Jacques Karel Henry van Stein van Hensbroek. Oh, for God's sake, it's another one of those like 10 names. I'm just going to call him Jacques Cousteau. Okay, so Lieutenant Jacques was stationed on one of these islands. Now, this island was Flores Island. And for people that don't know where Flores Island is, it's kind of near Java. And actually, is it? Well, it's east of Bali, so it's east of Java. Yeah, so, well, it's Indonesia. It's one of the Indonesian islands. And it's a fairly large island. And for people that want to go to the Komodo Islands, you will fly into Flores and head out from there. And there are actual Komodo dragons on Flores Island. They're just not as common. But this Jacques bloke was stationed on Flores Island. Yeah, it's east of Java. So while carrying out his military duties, he repeatedly heard whispers and stories from the locals and fishermen that have come back from islands just off Flores. He heard whispers about giant lizards living on those islands. And they would say they were, over 10 feet long. And the locals said that these giant lizards ate buffalo, they ate deer, and they also attacked and ate humans. So fishermen that maybe stopped off on these islands, or maybe came into some trouble on their boats and had to stop on the island for supplies or to fix their boat, there were talks that these giant lizards would attack and eat them. So they were kind of like wary of these islands. And the locals also called them land crocodiles because they were so big. They assumed that they were crocodiles that lived primarily on land. So this Lieutenant Jacques had a keen interest in natural history. Just naturally, he was curious as to what the hell these lizards or land crocodiles actually were. And I mean, a lot of times when you hear stories like this from the locals, you just naturally assume that it's just superstition, it's folklore. But he didn't believe that. These fishermen weren't seeking him out to tell him these stories and just like spin a yarn. They would be he would overhear them talking like, "Oh, the bloody giant lizards, man! I bloody ate Travis the other day. Bloody giant land crocodiles." So Lieutenant Jacques was very interested. He was like, "There's something to this story, you know." So later in 1910, the lieutenant organized a small expedition to head out to these islands. Now, the Komodo Islands make up. There's quite a few islands that consist of the Komodo Islands. The most well-known one is Rincha Island, and that's where the largest Komodo dragons are found. And the lieutenant was armed with a rifle and a few local guides. And yeah, he set out to explore some of these islands that make up the Komodo Islands. Now, he landed on the island, noticed that the shores were quite. There was no one living on these islands. It's a rugged shoreline, and the scrub on Komodo Islands, it's not like tropical rainforest. It's kind of arid. It's rocky. There's grasslands. It's very scrub-like. You know, it's not thick jungle forest. It's more scrubby forest. It actually looks quite similar to some of the places here that we've got in Australia. Now, the mood amongst these this hunting party was very tense because the locals he brought over with him knew what was on those islands. So they had never gone out purposely to look for these giant lizards. And of course you hear the stories of these lizards eating people, taking down buffalo. So you've got to be pretty damn wary, alright? And the group tracked through the bush looking for the lizards. They followed tracks, they followed signs, strange claw marks, because younger Komodo dragons will climb trees. So there might have been, faint claw marks in the trees or bark missing. And also monitor lizards, which Komodo dragons are a member of. They're a type of monitor lizard. They leave pretty distinctive tracks. Like, you don't have to be that good a tracker to know what a monitor lizard track looks like. It's pretty standout-ish. Like, you can see clear front hand marks, and it looks like your typical lizard. And then the back ones, the back feet, rather, it's unmistakable. And you can see the tail drag mark as well. So you know a monitor lizard track when you see one. And of course the locals knew what these tracks looked like. Now, it wasn't long before the lieutenant and the rest of the group encountered their first giant lizard. And obviously Lieutenant Jacques, he's a well-travelled person. He's seen large lizards before. Being a lieutenant in Indonesia, he would have for sure seen Asian water monitors, which is Varanus salvator, which are huge lizards in themselves. They're massive lizards, but this was unlike anything he had seen before. Now, the lieutenant shot and killed this lizard with his rifle, and this particular specimen measured 2.1 meters long, or 7 feet. So a big lizard, but by no means the biggest. Now, the first thing he noticed was just how muscular and thick and heavy set this lizard was. They've got massive leg muscles, big, thick tail, and after shooting it, it just confirmed that what these locals have been talking about is absolutely true. You see a lizard that's the size of a man or bigger, certainly longer, it's mind-blowing. Even a 7-foot Komodo dragon is ridiculous seeing it in person. It's, you see an iguana, which is a big lizard and can be 6 feet long and fairly heavily built. You put that next to a 6-foot Komodo dragon and it'll look like nothing. because the majority of both lizards' length is taken up by the tail. But although iguanas do have thick tails, it's nothing compared to a Komodo dragon's tail. And you just look at a Komodo dragon's head and it's just a big mug. It's a big bloody noggin on it. It's just apples and oranges between a 6 foot any other lizard and a 6 foot Komodo dragon. Just nothing compares. So Lieutenant Jacques skinned the animal. He took measurements, which is pretty good of him to do that, considering he's a military officer. So he's not trained in biology or anything like that, but he knew to do this, which is really good of him. Like that takes some brains. So he skinned it. He preserved the skin. He took photos of the carcass. He also took down eyewitness accounts of this lizard's behavior. So what the fishermen have witnessed themselves, behavior-wise, he took note of that, which is, man, I'm impressed with this guy. All right. So when he went back to Flores Island, he obviously had the photos, had the skin, and he sent them to a Peter A. Owens, the director of the Zoological Museum in Java. Now, this bloke was immediately intrigued, as you would be, being sent basically the skin and photographs of a monster. And he knew straight away that this is an important discovery. Alright? And 2 years later, in 1912, he formally described the species. So if you're describing a new species, you kind of need a vouchered specimen of that animal, so a dead specimen. A skin will do. You preferably want the whole animal so you can preserve it even more, so you can see what it looks like filled out. But skin will do. Nowadays we use a lot of DNA, but back then that wasn't a thing. So a skin and photos would work fine. So he formally described it and named it Varanus komodoensis. So Varanus is the genus that monitor lizards are in. They're in the family Varanidae. And he immediately recognized the Komodo dragon as a monitor lizard. And we still use Varanus komodoensis even to this day. It is still the scientific name of the Komodo dragon. So this was the first time the Komodo dragon was scientifically recognized as its own species and as just existing. Now, after this, there was a flurry of zoologists heading to Komodo Island to catch a glimpse and study the Komodo dragon. And obviously with that, there was a lot of zoos that wanted specimens in their zoo. And a lot of living Komodo dragons were collected for zoos. Now, the numbers of Komodo dragons weren't really known, so the population wasn't really known. So taking specimens for zoos, and they took a lot, they didn't really know the impact that would have had on the population. And it turns out now that the population is not doing too great because they're very limited to only a few islands. So it's not like they can expand enormously. And obviously, when there are islands like the Komodo Islands, there are introduced species like goats and things like that, which, yes, they do. They are on the menu for Komodo dragons, but they also trample a lot of nests and things like that. So although the Komodo dragons do eat them, they still cause a lot of havoc on that island. So basically, it was only, 115 years ago, the Komodo dragon was once thought to be a myth and then was confirmed. Which is pretty crazy to think about. Like, yes, 100 years ago, there was still a lot of undescribed species, especially in Indonesia, where that entire archipelago, there are thousands of islands that make up the Indonesian archipelago. I want to say somewhere like 20,000 islands that make up Indonesia. Now, they can range anywhere from like Java or Sumatra, which are big, big islands, all the way to like tiny, tiny little islands. So there are a lot of islands with a lot of animals on those islands. And some animals are endemic only to certain islands. So even to this day, there are still animals being discovered in Indonesia, which is pretty damn cool. But I don't think there's going to be animals the size of Komodo dragons that are still undiscovered. But hey, you never know. I went to Sumatra, which is a large island in Indonesia, looking for an undiscovered species of ape. Now, I was doing other stuff there. I was doing a Simang survey. It's like a call and callback survey thing. But I was certainly looking for that ape, and I did find some footprints that, you know, looked pretty interesting. So, yeah, I do believe there are still largish animals that are undiscovered, but the ape I was looking for isn't even anywhere near the size of Komodo dragon. Now, to this day, you can go and see these Komodo dragons in the wild. You'll probably go to Rincha or somewhere else, one of the other islands, but Rincha's kind of like the main one. Now, Komodo dragons 100 years ago were probably larger on average than they are today, because a lot of the bigger specimens of Komodo dragons were hunted or taken for zoos, so that gene pool kind of went down a little bit, but still, it's not uncommon to see 8 or 9 foot Komodo dragons still on those islands, which is damn cool. And yes, there are confirmed attacks where Komodo dragons have killed and consumed human beings. Imagine that. Imagine getting eaten by a bloody lizard. Like, that is nuts. I remember watching like a documentary years ago when I was a kid, and there was some dude, he might have been a kid as well, I don't know, he fell off a log or something and got eaten by a Komodo dragon. All they found was his spectacles. Like, how cool is that? Not for the kid, but, you know, it sparked my interest. And also, the King Kong movies were actually inspired by the Komodo Islands. So Skull Island, where King Kong is set, was inspired by this mysterious chain of islands that have this monster lizard living on them. That inspired the dude to create King Kong. Directly inspired him. And if you look at Skull Island, like the portrayals of Skull Island where King Kong's found, you can see why, you know, like there's a similarity. You know, it's a very sort of rustic looking island, rugged, and it's quite difficult to get to. You know, you can only go by boat to the Komodo Islands. So, yeah, King Kong was inspired by the discovery of the Komodo dragon, which is pretty damn cool. And obviously Godzilla was inspired by the early King Kong movies. I can talk a lot about Godzilla movies. I bloody love them, especially the old ones. Although they went downhill certain periods where, you know, he had a son and he was dancing around and doing cartwheels and shit. That went downhill for me. But then it resurged and became good again. Anyway, that's for another episode. Now, Komodo dragons. I will give you a little biology lesson on Komodo dragons. We know how big they are. We know how big they get. We know they eat goats and occasionally the person. But they also eat large animals like water buffaloes. Now, a Komodo dragon being 86 kilograms and 9 or 10 feet long couldn't take down a water buffalo based just on its own power. It couldn't. Water buffaloes are huge, far stronger than a Komodo dragon. Now, what Komodo dragons do have is venom. Now, it was only recently discovered that they actually have venom glands in their lower jaws. In fact, most, if not all, monitor lizards have now been confirmed to have this. But it used to be there is these types of bacteria in the saliva of the Komodo dragon that would basically infect the animal that was bitten by the lizard and ultimately would cause the demise of this animal. Basically, it had a dirty mouth, and that's what killed the animal. Its blood would go septic and eventually succumb to these bacteria. Now, what we know now is it does have a venom, and that venom is pretty potent. What the venom does is it serves as an anticoagulant and also can cause the animal to go into shock. So the animal will just keep bleeding, which eventually will cause the animal to go into shock. But it's also a combination. So they think now that it's a mix of that venom and that saliva that is basically the perfect storm. So the Komodo dragon will bite the water buffalo, can bite it anywhere. On the leg is probably the easiest place for the Komodo dragon to bite the buffalo. The buffalo will then wander off into the bush and over the next few days eventually die. And then the Komodo dragon, using that forked tongue, which is what snakes have, they will pick up the scent and, track that dead water buffalo down and eat it. Or just eat it while it's still alive but incapable of defending itself. Pretty gruesome. Now, I've seen videos of Komodo dragons swallowing monkeys whole. Like, they can open up their throats something wicked and just, shovel a small goat straight down the hatch. Doesn't even have to pull it apart. But with water buffaloes, they will just sit there and eat it, even if the buffalo isn't fully dead. And obviously that will attract multiple Komodo dragons around this one kill, and they'll all sit there and gorge themselves. Now, a full Komodo dragon can pretty much double its weight just from having a full stomach. And you can tell when they've got a full stomach that it's like dragging on the floor. They just look fat as anything. It's pretty crazy. But that's what I love about Komodo dragons and the Komodo Islands as a whole. It's this mysterious chain of islands that have this giant lizard that is found nowhere else in the world but on these islands. It's really cool. And there is an island that is part of that chain. I can't remember what it's called, but there may be a population of Komodo dragons living on that island. They don't know. They only saw potential nest sites via drones that looked just like Komodo dragon nests. Now, what's interesting is Komodo dragons can reproduce via parthenogenesis, which means they don't need a mate or a male to fertilize them, to impregnate them. The females can lay fertile eggs, which is pretty crazy. So what Komodo dragons are, another thing they're really good at is swimming. And parthenogenesis is a way that animals can populate islands just from one individual. So let's say a female swam to this island, laid fertilized eggs. The eggs hatch as males and then eventually will mate with the mother, and you've got a population going. Yes, it will be a severely inbred population, but a population nonetheless. So Komodo dragons are pretty fascinating. Not just the way that they were discovered, not just their venom, but also the way they can reproduce. And also the islands whole, the islands that proper, are super interesting. The whole story behind Komodo dragons is interesting. So, yeah, I hope you learned a thing or two about how cool Komodo dragons are. They got everything going for them. Their weaponry, their size, their mysterious islands. That's why they were the perfect candidate for Thorne's jungle. Because I'm all about mystery, baby, and so is Thorne's jungle. So, let's welcome the Komodo dragon into Thorne's jungle. Anyway, that's the episode. That's Komodo dragons. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time on another episode of Thorn's Jungle. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff. Especially leave a rating on whatever app you're using to listen to this. Don't forget to subscribe and rate it. It's pretty crazy how much that actually helps the podcast. And of course, there's the Patreon if you want extra content. Is that the mailman? Delivering Thorn's Jungle shirts. See you next time.